Last time out, we made this guy. Just a not so fancy cross peen hammer, and we got to give it a test run. So I thought, I have a ton of 1080 steel scraps from all the tools I make. They make nice little hunting knives. So I've got a piece. We'll try to see if we can forge one out completely by hand. I'm not a knife maker. You guys who watch know that. I'm more into the tools. But once in a while, it's nice to make a knife because especially forging one out, it gets you better at your hammer strikes, a little more accuracy. It's just good practice. And to be honest with you, they sell fast. So we'll make one. Once it's done, we'll throw it up on the website. First come, first serve. But so anyway, let's get to it. Well, we're in the following day right now on this project. So this is what we have so far. This is what we forged out by hand. So far everything on this has been by hand. Like I said, the big purpose was to test out this hammer that we made. Nothing like making a knife to test out your hammer control. I'm looking for how deep the hammer marks are. And I get a nice... So we don't have a bunch of deep hammer marks, which is nice. It means I got my edges ground and that hammer face dressed the way I like it. But now we can do some grinding on it, rough grinding. So we're going to do our rough grinding. This has been annealed overnight, so what I did is I got it slightly above magnetic, and then I put it in a metal trash can filled with perlite, and that allows it to cool down really slow and get that grain structure really nice. So that way, if we were to break it, it doesn't look like granulated sugar, but it looks smooth. In the forging process, when you're making tools or knives or anything like that, the forging process will heat this steel so much that the grains are going to get really big, and that's going to make something really brittle. You may be able to clean it up, hold a nice edge, but it'll be a lot easier to break. You can't tell after you grind, you can't tell from looking at the outside that grain structure is right. So you want to anneal it. That also helps soften it up, make it easy to grind on. Then you can also run it through a couple of normalizing cycles. And then if you were to try to break that after you harden it, that grain's going to look beautiful. So we're going to get on the 2x72. We're going to get rough grinding it. And then we're going to quench this thing. Now that we have the rough profile ground out, now keep in mind, I did most of this on the anvil, so this cut my grinding time down to nothing. It was just a matter of quick cleanup on where the cutting edge is going to be and a quick cleanup on the spine. Now, of course, where the scales are going, that took a little bit more time, but what I do is I ground this out with a 24 grit ceramic belt in, no, not ceramic, excuse me, an oxide belt, and I need this nice and flat. But before we go to harden and temper this blade, this steel, because I annealed it in the bin of perlite, I can easily drill holes through here with regular drill bits. If I quench this, even back here is going to harden up enough to where it's going to be damn near impossible to drill this out. So this is the time now. We also have a bit of a taper on here on the spine. And when you go this way, we've got a little bit of a distal taper. So it starts thicker up here and the whole blade works its way down a little bit thinner up towards the tip. So I have a little trick, because when I drill my pinholes, I want to make sure that they're going through nice and square. So let me show you what I do to correct that. It's kind of a simple trick here. All I do is I take a little drill bit and I find the size. I've already done it, so I know it works. Because this is a tapered tang, I find a drill bit, I put it under the thin end, push that down, and then I take my square and I make sure that my drill bit is nice and square to this tang, and that way I have nice square holes coming out of this thing. Makes it a lot easier when I go to line all this up, because when I go to put my pins in, it's going to be a pain to not have that just right, if that makes any sense. Can't talk today. So with our brass pinholes drilled in the tang, what we're going to do now is we're going to put a bunch of larger holes in here as a spot to help the epoxy grip and connect the scales on both sides to make it last a lot longer. Plus what it'll do is it'll lighten the tang up so that when we do put scales on it, we want a well-balanced knife. So I want to keep that weight evened up, and that wood's going to add just enough weight. But keep in mind also, we're going to be removing some weight from this side once we grind this bevel in. And if I don't take some holes out, this is still going to be a little bit heavier, so we want to even that up. It's not going to affect the strength of the knife at all, because it's not like we're going to be putting a million holes, but we're going to put a few here and there just to help that epoxy connection. We're to the point now where we can fire the forge back up and get ready for the heat treat. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this cutting edge a little bit above magnetic. It's not a bad idea when you're making tools, things that you have to temper. Little magnet, cheap hazard fraught magnet, works great. So what we're going to do is we're going to get this metal hot enough to where this magnet doesn't stick anymore. And then we're going to take it up just a little bit brighter than that. You can find a lot of color charts online to tell you what the temperature of these steels are for hardening and all that. Now I use 1080 steel for a lot of stuff. I love 1080 steel. It's just such a nice, forgiving steel to work with, but it's super strong and holds an amazing edge. So the heat treatment is it's beautiful for this. It's easy. So what we're going to do, get this above magnetic. We're going to quench it. We're going to preheat the oil a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit. And then after that, we're going to do a hot plate temper on it. see how dull that is? It's non-magnetic already. It's really easy to overheat this stuff and ruin all the work you just did. Especially in a bright shop like this. Now I have the lights on for the camera so that you guys can see what we're doing here. That's magnetic there, non there. Go just a little bit more and then we're going to quench it. But you get used to what your colors look like. Alright, close enough. You see I'm not quenching the tang. I want that tang nice and soft, so I want that strength. We're looking for warps. Actually looks pretty darn good. Stayed nice and straight. Do a hot plate temper. Now, we don't want to drop that on the concrete because it's quite hard. It could shatter real easy. Now, when you're doing this, you want to keep a bucket of water handy so that you could stop and slow the heating up as it goes. So I'm just going to lay this on its spine and kind of let this piece of hot steel heat the knife up. Now this takes a few minutes. It's not a fast process, but if you're taking your time, it actually works pretty well. So before you do it, you've got to actually clean the metal up just enough so you can see the tempers, and I'm looking for that kind of a dark straw color, kind of a dark golden color. And obviously you've got to really watch. You've got to really watch your steel because on the thinner parts it's going to heat up a lot faster. It's easier to do this with a straight spine blade. But this isn't too bad. You can see we're already darkening. The heat's starting to travel up this way. We're actually starting to get a little color, just a little bit coming up the cutting edge. And the reason you want a bucket of water handy is you may have to slow this process down, because if you start getting too dark in one spot or another, you got to be able to cool it down pretty quick. You start to see the colors move. You pull it off a little bit and you watch it. And we're starting to get that straw color. You probably can't tell in the camera, but we're starting to get it building up the cutting edge. And we're getting that kind of a purplish blue going down the spine, which is kind of exactly what I want. I've started the grinding process already. So this is the hard part for me. This is the part that, especially in knives, dual bevels, I've gotten a lot better at it. I freehand everything. I've tried jigs. I don't like it very much. But now I kind of do it all by eye. Some people are a lot more scientific about it. So basically, the best tip I could give you from my, not all that much experience, but enough, is slow the grinder rate down. If you have a 2x72, which I do, when I built it, I put a variable frequency drive on it. I run it at half speed, even on the coarse belts. Now remember, the finer the belt you use, the slower you have to run that, because the fine belts build up heat a lot faster than the coarse belts. So I'm going to take this close with the 24 grit belt, but I'm going to leave quite a bit of meat, because a mistake I used to make a lot doing this is when I'd start grinding, I go too close to finish with a coarse belt, and then all of a sudden I'm grinding through material that I don't want to remove to get the scratches out of it as I work up to progression in the finer belts. Now we're going to leave the Brute to Forge look up through focus. We're going to leave that scale and everything up through there, and all I did with that is I ran a wire wheel for my grinder over it. It cleans it up nice, makes it nice and smooth, but you still have that texture and it shines it up. After that, we'll take a little bit of linseed oil or whatever and put it on there just to kind of make that nice. So we're going to get grinding. Same thing with the temper. Have a bucket of water handy with you. Only take 1 or 2 passes at a time. Keep cooling it off as you go, because it's really, really easy to screw up your heat treat, especially near this tip. You want to take it real slow and watch yourself as you're going. A lot of people, I notice, will tend to go through and they'll work the tip at the same rate that they work this. Well, what happens with that is you end up destroying your tip because you've worked it down too much. So if you have a distal taper and you know this part up here is thicker in the spine, start at this end and kind of work it across low and nice and easy, and then work that until you get a uniform thickness on the bevel itself all the way through. So I find that when I'm going to grind my bevels into my blade, it could be kind of a hard process at first, especially freehanding. But what I do is I start on the anvil by starting to form the bevel some. That way I have an angle to start with. As I go through, I just kind of try to follow it. I eyeball the plunge lines, and you could do jigs, but I'll start with my belt slightly off of one side of my platen here. That way I don't go too far in once that plunge line is established. Now I'm not perfect with them, but they're getting better with every one, and that just comes down to some patience. But I do light passes, and once I kind of get that spot, depending on how I want my blade, if I want the bevel a little more straight across, and I want my lines lower, I'll come across kind of straight. If I want to get so it's more, the bevel radius is up the blade, I'll start out straight and then I will slowly work it up, and then I'll get it straight up. Now, I already have a little bit sharper of a bevel on the tip than I do everywhere else, and I'd like to do that at first really slow with the grinder, so that as I go, I'm not contacting that tip again until it's almost ground out. Now, like I said, I am not a professional at knife making by any stretch of the word, but this is just little things that have helped me quite a bit. So again, to reiterate, if I'm sweeping this bevel up, bring it across, and then I start working it down, and then I go down as far as I want. Now, they make some platens, some of the grinder manufacturers, where you can adjust it really deep and you can maintain the same. Like I said, I eyeball it and try to keep it as even as I can. You can see I have a little bit farther to go on this side, but I also eyeball this center line down through and make sure I'm not taking off too much at a time. Working the grinder really slow helps a lot also, because for one, you're not generating a bunch of heat, and the other thing, you're slowing the process down so you can catch yourself before you make a mistake that's going to make you have to start over. Now, before I do my finish sharpening and my hand sanding, which is the biggest pain in the ass part, I'd like to put a choil in, which is this round part that separates the blade from the plunge lines. If you don't put the choil in, you'll notice over the years as you sharpen it, you're actually going to start working your blade edge down. Now, it's exaggerated, but it's kind of how it goes. Now, this being heat treated, it's a little harder to file it in. But you notice it's just soft enough that we still move the metal just fine. And all I use is a chainsaw file, a small one. It is an annoying sound, but that's the sound of hardened steel against a file. Just enough to give you clearance for that bevel. We're at the part of this project that nobody likes, and that is the hand sanding portion of it. So we want to take this edge right here. You can see that. Now this is ground to 300 grit or 320 grit on the 2x72. We want to take it from this to this. And I got some fingerprints on there, but you get the damn autofocus. You get the idea of what we're doing here. So this step right here is honestly, this separates, you know, your lower end knives from your higher end the time you take to finish it off. Obviously the heat treat is super important, but you can have a perfectly heat treated blade and still have it look very unrefined. Now, I could show you a lot of stuff that I made starting out that is worse than unrefined. Hammer marks all through it, just a lot of amateur stuff, you know what I mean? And I'm just trying now to step from that level to a little bit higher end. It pushes yourself to get better at this stuff, and it's just time. That's all it takes, is a little bit of time. So it's kind of neat when you can use your hunting knife as a mirror. So we're going to start with 320 grit wet dry sandpaper and a block of wood. This also kind of helps disguise some of your maybe some of your grinding flaws, because you can blend things in. A Scotch-Brite belt does much the same. You don't have to bear down crazy on it when you're doing it. Just kind of go easy. Once in a while, rinse it down with some Windex. We're moving right along with this. Now we have it sanded, polished, the actual blade itself. It's time to get to work on the scales. So I need clean surfaces to be able to epoxy to. So we ran this on the grinder. You don't go with a fine grit. I like to leave a little roughness there to help the epoxy hold. And also remember, we have these holes here, and that is so the epoxy goes through and catches the wood scales. Kind of helps everything hold better over time. So I've already made the left hand scale. All I did, left hand side of the knife, if the point's facing out, just remember your system, because if you get them backwards when you go to put them together, you're going to be very frustrated, very angry. Again, don't ask me how I know, but I can tell you from experience it sucks. So we just take it, I trace out this tang onto this handle blank, and all we're going to do, we're just going to trace this. Going to be a mirror image. We'll cut it out on the scroll saw, and that'll be it. Ah! All right, are we ready? Can we focus? Maybe. Look at that. Been quite a while since we've sat with our feet up in here and just talked to you guys. So, there she is, everybody. Nice, shiny. Yeah, I'm happy with this. Honestly, this is probably the nicest one I've made yet. So, I use a lot of walnut because I have a lot of walnut, and I just love the way walnut looks. But this I'll throw it on the website as soon as I get the sheath done. It'll be up there for sale, first come, first serve. So this steel right here, this is out of a botched draw knife. So I have quite a few of those because the learning curve, believe it or not, when you're forging stuff and trying to teach yourself, you end up with a pile of scrap and mistakes. So as long as the steel's not burnt up, I might as well get some good use out of it. Now this is shaving sharp. She's polished up. We have a coat of linseed oil on it, but what I will do is I'm going to get a couple coats of spar urethane on it, seal this wood up. Walnut doesn't always play the nicest unless you seal it up really well. But I'm happy with it. It's probably the nicest handle I've made to date. You know, it's got a decent shape. It's very comfortable to hold on to. Not too big, not too small. I'm happy with it. So, I'm not going to be able to be in the forge this week because I'm working out of town. Hotel living for the next week, but that's all right. As soon as we get back, I'm probably going to make a few more of these. The next video will be a timber framing slick because I actually have quite a few of those. I need to make 3 inchers, so I'll show you guys the process that I use for making those. But yeah, anyway, thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the next one.